Now, the media finally found some time to cover the war in Iraq today, but don't panic. It's not that, it was the good news that they were interested in. They didn't find any. It was marking the 5-year anniversary of the invasion. In fact, let me show you the same New York Times. I love this cover. That's a dead Iraqi soldier right there. Okay? Happy 5th anniversary. If you've noticed less stories in the war on TV or, the newspaper, you're not imagining things. In fact, journalists have seemingly done what many people have been hoping our military would do, and that's they've just withdrawn. They've withdrawn all the coverage from the story. While it's easy and convenient to blame the lack of coverage on how difficult the war is to cover or how tired people have become of it, the real story is simple. The war in Iraq gets no attention because we're winning. I've been saying for years Americans don't have a problem with a war, they have a problem with losing a war. But the exact opposite is true for most of the media. Winning a war means they're forced to show video of things like bustling street markets, or kids going to school, businessmen heading for work, happy people. Images that are about as exciting as showing glacial ice freezing, which is exactly why you'll never see that either. Car bombs, IEDs, and big explosions, those are the crumbling glaciers and the dead polar bears of Iraq, because those images get ratings. And if you haven't noticed, ratings equal money. And media companies really, really, really like money. So how bad has the Iraqi coverage gotten? Well, in the first 10 weeks of 2007, before the surge began, remember when everything was horrible? 23% of all television, newspaper, and internet stories, 23% all about Iraq. In the first 10 weeks of 2008, that number has dropped to 3%. Cable news networks spent 24% of their time on Iraq last year. This year, 1%. That's a 96% drop-off in coverage. I wonder why that is. In fact, I bet if you charted the media coverage right alongside U.S. troop casualties, you'd find a pretty clear correlation. Because what's good for American media is usually just the opposite for the American people. Mark Jerkowitz is the Associate Director of the Project for Excellence in Journalism. Mark, I wasn't covering the war like a journalist should cover the war a year ago. I'm not a journalist. I had my theory on this one a long time ago. Why the drop-off? Some people are being consistent with their coverage. Most people aren't.
Well, Glenn, there's actually a couple of reasons. One that you touched on, and we won't go to motives, but clearly, since the surge has appeared to succeed in terms of reducing violence within the country of Iraq itself, there's been less coverage of the war itself. And we can talk about why that is, and that the media is always looking for conflict and turmoil. We all know that we cover a plane crash more than we cover a plane landing safely at an airport. But clearly there has been a reduction in violence and of the war itself and of the carnage. And on one level, that's been responsible for some of the drop-off. The other thing that's worth mentioning, however, is that for a good chunk of 2007, the actual biggest component of war coverage was the political debate that took place here in Washington. And you have to remember what that was like. 2007, a new Democratic Congress comes in. They think they have a mandate from the people to end the war. The president immediately announces a surge. We look like we're going to have a classic battle royale for political control over the war. As the year goes on, it becomes evident that the president is going to regain and retain control over the purse strings and the strategy for the war, and media coverage of that political battle starts to drop off as well dramatically in the second half of 2007. As a matter of fact, that's been an even bigger drop-off than what we're seeing from inside the country. Okay,
so you have the election going on right now.
Sure.
You have some drop-off now because everybody's covering the election. I swear to you, the media cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. We're all a bunch of dopes in this industry. But they're covering the election, but the war is part of that on the campaign trail. Anything going to change?
I think that something may change. And first of all, you're right. Obviously, the campaign is almost sucking all of the oxygen out of the media universe. It's taking an incredible amount of resources. In the first 3 months of this month, the coverage of war has been like 15 to 1. Of the campaign has been like 15 to 1 over the war. So we know that. What I think surprised people is some people thought this campaign was going to be all about the war. We know now that issue number one with people is the economy. But I get a sense that when we get into the general election, when we are going to have two very different views of the war in Iraq and where it's going, we will probably see a refocusing of coverage, and that's independent of whether or not there are spikes of violence and the war takes a different turn. But my sense is it will be a bigger issue in the general election than it's been in the Democratic primary, and then I would expect to see some kind of an uptick in coverage.
All right, thanks, Mark.